Hey, FNRadsters, thanks for tuning in. Firstly, happy April 1st, Craig Kelly's birthday. As you know, I like to put out a little something special to celebrate Craig each year, and today I'm going to share a little sneak preview of a brand new History of Snowboarding podcast you might have already heard of. It's called Going Off. It's hosted by Jen Sherowski, a former pro snowboarder, senior editor at Transworld Snowboard Mag, and creative director over at Nemo Designs, and her best friend, Tricia Byrnes, who won a shitload of halfpipe contests in the 90s and 2000s, rode pro for Burton, and scored a 6th at the Salt Lake Olympics. Going Off is a fun deep dive into all things snowboard history with episodes like What Roadkill Says About Snowboarding in 1993 and What It Was Like to Be a Snowboarder in 1985. It's a fun research and interview-based podcast that showcases these two best friends and their love of snowboarding. So bringing it back to Craig, I got a sneak preview of Going Off's upcoming episode next week, and it's about our favorite snowboarder and all-time greatest ever to strap in onto a board, Craig Elmer Kelly, and why you see Craig is my co-pilot stickers on some pretty important snowboarders' boards. I'll link to the entire episode when it's out, but for now, for Craig, I put on my snowboard history expert cap. Okay, about that. I'm fascinated by snowboard history, but I'm certainly not an expert like Trent Bush or Pat Bridges. I never fact-check my guests, and my research often consists of mostly finding out when my guests are available to record. That being said, I'm acting like an expert in this clip, so I need to quote the Mohawk Warriors Handbook and say, quote, "This is how it was told to me, this is what I have heard, and this is my understanding," end quote. Please enjoy this clip about Jake, Tom, and Craig. There's this push, and that push between Jake and Tom, or between those two camps, you know, the people that were working at Burton and the people that were working at Sims, that push between those two is what put it over the edge. And Craig just became this kind of, from almost unknown player to like the main character in that push and pull between those guys. Yeah. Which started basically with Tom saying in like 77, I invented the snowboard, which pushed Jake to be like, Tom did not invent the snowboard. They're like, Tom's like, I did. And Jake's like, he didn't, you know, and it started there. And then it went through like freestyle's going to be the thing. Jake knew that like governing bodies in ski could bring snowboarding to the Olympics as a race discipline.
Yeah.
But that freestyle probably wouldn't make it, was in his mind. And then he was pretty embarrassed of that later on. But there was this push and pull, and where it really came to a head was with Craig. And you've already mentioned that Brad Dorfman taking over the rights to the Sims name. I heard from, I think Brad Stewart, said like Tom got a check for $200,000 for the rights to Sims, and he took off.
He bounced.
He just went to Santa Barbara. Yeah. He surfed. He chilled out, and then he showed up in like December with like a scroll where he'd drawn like, hey, maybe this could be a shape this year. And they're like, it's December. We've already shipped all the boards.
We're on it. Is my next installment of $200,000 here?
Yeah, exactly. But Tom really pushed the design of snowboarding, and Craig benefited from being on those Sims boards because they were just better, and the bindings and the innovation that was going on. And there is definitely an argument to be made that when Craig moved to Burton, he really did seal the fate of Sims by taking their proprietary knowledge and bringing it over to Burton. And Burton had the systems in place, or the forward-thinking business acumen to be like, okay, this is how we do this.
And Jake always really like leaned on the riders and made them do, you know, tons of product research. And for anybody like somebody like Craig, who's already tweaking and testing and has that engineer mind to get the keys to that kind of a castle, and then to have Jake be like, have at it, tell us what to do. You know, it's kind of like a magic moment.
Powerful.
There's an argument to be made that Jake didn't do that up until Craig got there. right? Because like
Oh
the
yeah, because he
Coughlin
was still
brothers were like,
competing, right?
yeah. And the Coughlin brothers were like, hey, we can drop the rope. And Jake was like, I'm not sure about dropping the rope. They're like, dude, we rode with no rope last night.
Trust us.
It's way
Let's
better.
Oh yeah. The rope on the snowboard. Yeah, sorry.
But that was the agreement that Craig and Jake came to, was like, Craig's like, if I come over here, you got to listen. And I mean, really listen to the people that are doing this every single day, because without listening, we don't have a chance. Right.
Yeah.
Which Jake maintained all the way through, which is.
I think Burton still does it now. I think that they built their platform on it. It can't be overstated, like how important it was to have the right gear. If you were a competitive snowboarder at that time, you couldn't win on a Look Lamar. You know what I mean? You just couldn't. It just didn't function properly.
Or just things broke all the time. Like you're just dealing with broken gear and
everyone's just kind of hacking and making their own mods to like what works for us, you know? So,
yeah. And there was an era in there where everybody was copying the Craig Kelly. And I mean, it changed the shapes of all the boards. And then people were like, God, come on. There's got to be something more than just this. But
take the nose down a bit.
And Craig kept pushing, right? But he wasn't the guy that was going to ask for a twin tip. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of where, he faded out from the, being the most relevant snowboarder in the world to being someone who was snowboarding for himself, which was still super relevant, but just he went to a whole nother level, which was awesome. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you check out the Going Off podcast wherever you download your audio, or at Going Off Snowboard History Podcast on YouTube. Thank you, Jen and Tricia, for having me on the show and producing this clip for FNRad.